Hello, everybody. Just want to wish everybody a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're located. Very excited about today's session on eCTD, global aspects and future directions. I have a very special guest today, but just very briefly to introduce myself, I'm Paul Hyland, the VP of Life Sciences here at DocShifter. So with that, I wanted to welcome Aki and say thank you very much for joining us.
Hi.
Hope everything is well there. Hope the weather's as nice in Germany as or Barcelona, wherever you're based. Hope it's as nice as it is here in London. So thank you very much again.
Thank you.
If you don't mind, what I wanted to maybe start just with a quick question is just to level set, just sort of what are some of the main purposes for eCTD? Obviously, initially, what were the reasons for it in the first place?
All right. Good. Thanks, Paul. I believe, if we're talking about the purpose of eCTD, I think we have to go a little bit about history. And unfortunately, what I can sense is now eCTD is something already old. We're talking about 20, 25 years of history. But we have to think about back in this point. I believe the main purpose is, making the whole process for the industry more efficient. And that was mainly the driver because in the old days, the industry had been drowning in paper volumes. They have been shipping papers, copying, and that is something which was a big hurdle. In the same way, also, we have the challenge that in every region, you had something different to submit. And both had been hindering the efficiency of drug approval process. It made it very cost effective, time consuming, etc. And so I believe one big step already before the millennium change, so more than 25 years ago, was the step to CTD. People may not know that, before CTD, there was something else. So the structure, how information should be structured, which submits to the agency, the submission structure, it was completely different for NDA in US or something, a new drug application in Europe, and completely different than in Japan. So ICH put a tremendous good job by putting something like at least a harmonized structure. And this was done as CTD. And so this was the one big leap which had been achieved, I think, before the millennium change. But it was not something which made everything so easy, but it was the next step where eCTD came up 20 years ago. And this is where I believe people have been talking about trying to have a harmonized approach. Because when we have to look back, agency received paper.
Mhm.
And thereafter, I think the first electronic applications had been that you had filed your hardware with your, information, so reviewer could sit on new hardware to watch it. But the the idea of eCTD is something as a technical harmonization, which allows to handle these is one, technology, which is then the sender, the industry, as well as the receiver knows what they get. And so they can prepare from those to view it. We have to think about that these had been, I think, a huge milestone. Um, and I believe, but we have to think about it was a technical harmonization. So next to the CTD, which is the structural harmonization, it was a technical harmonization, but it was not something which is, for example, the legal harmonization across countries, right? So
Mhm.
the eCTD focus was primarily technical. And I believe it was the push that agencies start working electronically. People today may not understand, but in the old days, people had been watching, reading paper. And sometimes the reviewer refused to work on computer because they're doing scientific work, right?
Yeah.
And that is, I believe, gone today, but it's the purpose still to make the whole process efficient still exists.
Okay. Yeah, and I wish I could say I was young enough that I don't remember paper. Unfortunately, my gray hair explains that I clearly am old enough to remember. So I definitely know the pains. But obviously, I know obviously it's there to bring in a lot of benefits, etc. as well. But I know there are obviously still some challenges. Obviously, it's evolved over time, eCTD as well. So what are some of those challenges globally, for eCTD, for both the industry and also the sponsor organization and vendors alike? What are some of
Right,
the
right. Good.
continuing challenges?
So I think the challenges of ECD, firstly, I believe sounds quite simple, trivial. And I remember in the old days where somebody in a big conference said, ECD is coming. So it was 20 years ago
Mhm.
already. And with the eCTD, every review gets the same submission worldwide. And this was somebody who really believed it. But this, by definition, is not the case, right? So I know that, or we all know that with CTD, at least for module 2 to 5, the structure itself is harmonized. The content not necessarily, because in some regions you have to do some filing different data, etc. So that is not harmonized. The structure is harmonized, and the technology is harmonized. But what we need to understand is also, and people know, that we have regional specifications. And I believe that's something we have a slide prepared for that we have today eCTDs specified by ICH. I think that's something you can see on the top row, where there's CTD 3.2 specification available, but then you have different regions, and every region have their own module 1 specification. So, and if you submit something today, ICH only harmonized it for module 2 to 5, but your submission contains also module 1, and this needs to be different in any region. So, and therefore, you have first on the left 14 regions to cover. Even so, Singapore is still on draft, so it's not officially something you can submit today as eCTD, but others are. In addition, what you can see over the timeline from 2002 to today are different blocks. This is what I wanted to just visualize, that we have different versions of eCTD specifications. They have been evolving. And for Europe, which is the second from next to US, is something you have many versions all the time, right? Because that is, and some, because of the complexity of many countries, many member states, this version number or numbers of version has been quite frequent. But on the other side, you can see we marked it the current one as in black text, the version number, if you can see it, but we have also a historic one. The challenge we have with that is also that you have to submit the current eCTD to an agency in a current version of your module 1 specification. But if you dealing with as a vendor as well as as an industry, sometimes you have to, work on challenges where historic eCTDs are required. So if, for example, you're merging with another company and you have to load historic submissions into your system to continue life cycle of an existing application. Historic sequences may be produced in an earlier version of the eCTD. So your system needs to be able to deal with also historic pieces. And therefore, not only the region stuff should be considered as part, but also the historic versions need to be manageable. So at least you can do this lifecycle processing, right? So, but with that, their versions are quite complex, but you can see version numbers in these little boxes. And there's a certain challenge because here I selected primarily the version numbers of the technical files. So it's a DTD file or the schema file, depending on which format region has been using, not the specification document itself. Only for the red boxes, these are the eCTD4 specification. I've chosen the specification version because the technical files have been slightly different in the schemas have been not evolved, more the specification has been more important. I think there's an additional slide here where, because I want to show the version numbers is something where it has an additional complexity. And this is something to mention that here today, the FDA, if you submit something to the FDA, you have to submit something which is based on a eCTD DTD 3.2. This eCTD specification, so the document itself has the version 3.2.2, right? And there is also a style sheet which visualizes backbones in your browser, has a version 2.2. But that's a more technical piece. The STF specification, the study tagging file specification, which is the subset within the module 5 in the clinical section for clinical study reports, has a document specification 261. And this is issued also by ICH. But the DTD, so the technical data, has a version 2.2 and the style sheet 2.3. If you go to the module 1 specification or the region specification, today the written document specification number is 2.5, the DTD version 3.3, and the style sheet still on 2.2. And then at the end, and you have the validation criteria, so how the FDA validates stuff. And the validation criteria is evolving more rapidly than the specification itself. This is currently on version 4.4. But also we have something additional like the PDF specification. So it's a specific document for PDF files to be submitted to the FDA and also for other file formats. I have selected only these versions because it's a subset of a bigger document the FDA had puts on their website. And you can, I think I put a location on it so you can search for. The point is, it is something where it is not just one current ECD specification. There's much more behind. And I just wanted to mention this because here, if somebody tells you, as a vendor, for example, we know we support all DTD versions. This is only a tip of the iceberg, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So, and maybe, but that's more the challenging from the process, from the technical piece. If you go to the process challenge itself, it is something where we have to think about, how do you submit? What kind of content do you submit? And the specification for, let's assume China. They are now on eCTD 3.2. They have their own specifications. But there's one thing, for example, saying all documents has to be in Chinese, or relevant documents. But as an international company, it's also appropriate to submit the original file in English or whatever language version it was available. Why I'm mentioning this, if you look at the validation criteria where it's which PDF file version, hyperlinks should not be broken, etc. These are validation criteria. They apply to the Chinese document version, not to your original. These are considered as reference files. So this is a unique item which is in China, but not in other countries, right? Mm-hmm. Another thing also to consider is something like, in Japan, not because I'm Japanese, but in Japan, you have something quite, quite unusual, that in other countries, you have an eCTD application, which is active as long as your product is active on the market. And you have then regulatory activities where you have your variations in your application. In Japan, regulatory activities and application are the same. So any major variation you file as a new application. So this is something different, which is related on their process. But also something like the reviewing process is different. Today in other countries, Europe, US, Canada, you file something and people ask them, this is something missing. So you file something in addition, you send sequences to reviewer. In Japan, you do something this in another way because there is a second step where there will be an eCTD for the experts outside of the PMDA. So you create a new baseline for the experts. And the third step, you create a baseline for the ministry for the final decision. So this has an impact also to the eCTD. Right? So, and also maybe the final process challenge is to mention is if you look at Europe, you have 27 countries. Well, 26, I don't know. But these are something where with more agencies, where you have a completely different challenge also for some validation criteria and filing process, which makes the story completely different than compared to FDA or other single country agencies, right? So, and these challenges are what I think where people needs to know that it is not just eCTD having a solution.
Great. Okay, thank you. In terms of, obviously, there's a lot of talk about eCTD 4.0 and how that's going to address some of the challenges. Can you talk to the future a little bit, if you like, especially maybe focused on eCTD 4.0 in particular?
Right. So, yes, I think the eCTD 4, I believe, it had been in discussion for quite a long time, but now it's moving on as the next version of eCTD. And I think one of the points is the main stuff is because the Japanese agency PMDA already in 2021 issued a pilot project, and since last year, the industry is allowed to submit optionally NDAs in eCTD 4.0 format, right? There are few companies participating, but they are. And so this is the first move, but also last year, the FDA started also an eCTD pilot in US for selected companies. And I believe just in end of April, so just a month ago, they finished their pilot, and they are going to an internal process. And I believe end of this year, or maybe too optimistic, early next year, they are starting accepting real eCTD in 4.0 format, right? So this is the current status. And with the FDA, we have to accept then the whole movement starts that the other agencies are also moving in direction to eCTD4. There is a slide which is the subset of a website of ICH where you can find some dates by different regions. These are still official numbers, but you have to be careful. These are a bit outdated because, I believe many agencies have been quite optimistic, and they announced something like, if you look at Brazil, they wanted to do something, a technical pilot already here this year, but we know they haven't started, right? And I know Europe is so busy with many activities, so it is unlikely that is something, but maybe crossing our fingers. So the FDA and Japan are the only one where you can see it's quite reliable having these numbers. But I know, for example, with Health Canada, they are not planning to have any pilots this year, right? They have their other projects and they're ongoing. Switzerland may come with TGA. It is something which is still ongoing. And I believe there will be an update next week, right, of
Okay.
this happening. So I believe eCTD is something which is new, but it's also something where I believe it's slowly moving. And the main thing we have to consider, it's not a big step. It has few advantages. Something like document reuse. It's much easier. We have enhanced lifecycle operation. I wouldn't mention so much two-way communication because this is something which had been, everybody was dreaming, but now the agency that going to production, they don't consider two-way communication too much of a high priority. But but what we can see for here is the whole movement from paper to electronic document, mainly PDF, to real data is ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
It is not that only 4.0 is the major step. Today, we have already filing in files where data is filed. But the 4.0 technology allows to use much more coded value. So the technology is there. And what I mentioned a few times in conferences where coded value could be also for help for the reviewers, which is not implemented today in the specification, but technically possible. If you would say, I'm taking for Europe, for example, substance and manufacture from spore, so Europeans core data. So instead of putting my manufacturer name, if I would submit the manufacturer ID, then the reviewing tool would be able to start more AI-based comparison within other applications, etc. So this is something where eCTD4 has the opportunity to do it, right? And so what comes beyond eCTD4, this is something where people are talking about FHIR, the fast healthcare interoperability resource, which is not designed originally for submission handling. It's for transmitting data, right, within the healthcare environment. And so this is something where people are thinking of, but I believe what we need to consider is something like the, mixing eCTD with IDMP. Today we have two different strengths, two routes. But in both cases, you're submitting information to you about your products. And that is something which can be merged. However, technically, it's an easier process, but it's a much bigger process, a much bigger challenge for the internal agency handling of data. Because today we're still paper-oriented. We have my application number, and this is the filing system. If we were dealing with data in a different way, not only by application, then it is an organization challenge. And this, I believe, is the challenge of the future. Right?
Very good. Thank you. With that, I did actually have a question come in, and to be honest, just following on a little bit, I know your involvement in the pilot for eCTD 4.0 and the FDA. Do you have any comment on any outcome from that pilot, the eCTD 4.0 pilot?
All
Anything
right,
you can comment on?
The eCTD pilot is something where I don't know if people know about it. It was a pilot by a closed shop. So I believe it's the Pharma Association of US. Their members had conversation with the FDA, and so a selected group of I don't know 11 or 12 pharma companies participated. It was not something which everybody could do by himself, right? So, and I know one company submitted something, and the FDA said, "Sorry, you're not part of a group. You're not member, so we don't take it." It may be that this will be done later this year, but I don't know. That's something we'll have to ask the FDA. Within that, few companies submitted. Several of them have been our customers. We provided them some solution, but I know there are also other companies, not our customer, they created their own submission and filed it. I believe there have been several small items, technical topics, but I believe something major to consider is document reuse.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea behind document reuse is very nice, because you submit a submission sequence today, a document inside, and you give an ID, a UUID for this document. And the next time you submit the same document, you just use the ID to do it. So the only thing is important is this document has to be at the FDA center, so you can reuse it. But now the question is, when you specify that this is at the FDA center. So, because when you submit through the gateway, you get a first acknowledgement. This is not the point where you can reuse this document already. The FDA have a second acknowledgement, which goes to the technical, let's say, checks, and then a third acknowledgement when your submission has been processed and within the reviewing system. When you receive the third acknowledgement, then you are allowed to do the document reuse by using this application. So there's a time lag between, and then when somebody filed another sequence with the same document, you get a rejection because the system does not have insight. And this is something we need to, think about what's the best solution. So you get this kind of, knowledge, but also how to implement this in process. And we from LORENZ are working with our customers how to establish these within the publishing environment. Right?
Okay.
So this is one of the outcomes of the pilot.
So is that something you feel can be achieved through a technical, like a vendor kind of update in terms of the technology used, or is that something that the actual specification itself might need to be adjusted to accommodate?
No, it's not a specification, but it is something where your internal process needs to know it.
Okay, very good. Did have a question as well, even before the session started. Specifically, I'm based in London, so I'm now outside of the EU, so to speak, and there was a few questions about the MHRA stance and their position right now on eCTD 4.0. And do they have a position? The table, for example, doesn't specify any specific dates or timings for the MHRA. Is there any comment or view on that at the moment?
No. I must admit that I don't have the latest details. Yep. I know that the MHRA is working on a new eCTD system for themselves. Sure. They have to tender out, and this is something that's a project ongoing. To my knowledge, is something they would like to finish this project, and then consider the next move into 4.0 movement. Right. I think that is something which is planned, but so therefore it is not to be expected.
Okay.
This year, right?
Very good. I know with that, unfortunately, we're out of time. There have been a few questions come in, so I just want to reassure everybody that the recording of this will go live literally within minutes of this session ending. It will be sort of available online on LinkedIn pretty much almost immediately when we finish. For those people that have asked questions, I will get back and I'll speak to Aki about obviously answering those questions that have come in that we've not been able to answer right now. But with that, I wanted to thank everybody. We're a couple of minutes over, so thanks everybody for joining. Thank you very much, Aki, for your time. Really appreciate it, and hope to see other people at future LinkedIn Live events. But thanks again, everybody, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.